Alrighty, so we're going to go ahead and get started tonight. Quick introduction. My name is Max Weiss. I'm the Assistant City Administrator and Project Manager here at the City of Batavia. I've been working on this project for probably about 6, 7, 8 months now. We've been starting this since earlier this year. And now we're coming to the stage where we're making some public presentations. And I'll kind of walk you through kind of where we're at in the process and what you can expect from here on out. But I'll also introduce my colleagues, City Administrator Laura Newman, Assistant Director of Public Works for Electric, Steve Allen, Public Works Director, Andrea Pedraza, and then our Communications Manager, Lori Botterman. There's also a couple of City Council members here tonight. I see Abby, Leah, Chris, Bob, and some others, and then Jen as well. So thank you all for coming tonight. I'm really glad to see a good turnout, even on a beautiful night of weather. So thank you for coming. It's really good that you're participating, you're here, and that you're part of the process. And that's going to be one of the things I emphasize tonight, is that this is a process. You know, we start off somewhere, we go through it, we make amendments, and we get to our final result. So everything you see at this stage is preliminary. The goal is to put it out there, get your input and your comments, make adjustments, and then put something back out for additional public comment. So tonight's going to work. I'm going to give a quick presentation, probably 15, 20 minutes, giving an overview of what the IRP, the Integrated Resource Plan, says. I'll take some questions and try to answer them as best I can. If I don't know or our team doesn't know, we'll write them down and we'll publish them with our question and answers as a whole. And then we'll do a public comment portion where anyone can say whatever they would like to say about the IRP. If you have pre-written remarks or something, you can send them to me. My email is on the PowerPoint as well. It's mweiss@bataviaisle.gov. It'll have the same impact as if you made public comment, but you're feel free to do whatever you would like. If you want to make a public comment, you can. If you want to send it written, you can. It's not going to make a difference in terms of how it gets put into the final
as of Friday, when I tried to find your email address on that thing, it didn't work. It sent you to no man's land. So I ended up calling the city and they gave me your email. So that link did not work for me.
Let's talk. We'll get you that because I was testing it earlier. All right.
Also wanted to mention that we have BATV here today, and they're going to make a recording of this event for those who were not able to attend. But because of that, there aren't any microphones in the audience there. So if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone over to you. Thanks.
All righty. So we're going to jump in. I'm going to try to get through this all in one, and then I'll take questions. But if you have something along the way that piques your interest, make a note of that and then ask it once we're through. It's going to kind of build on each other throughout the process. So I'll start by saying the preliminary integrated resource plan that was published on our website is long. It's 109 pages. I'm going to do my best to try to summarize what's in there. I also want you all to know I'm making myself available. If you want to dive into this deeper, please let me know and I'll take the time and we'll walk through it. We can go into more in depth as well. But basically, the IRP is broken down into 4 main parts. 1, load forecast. How much electricity are we expected to use, both now and long term? That's kind of the basis of what an IRP is. How much are you planning on using? 2, market price outlook. What do we expect the cost of electricity to be now and then into the future? Supply side options, which is what sorts of generation assets can you consider to address the problem? And then there's demand side options. What sort of things can you do to reduce the amount of electricity you use to therefore help fix some of the problem? So as a bit of background, the City of Batavia is developing its first integrated resource plan. This is something that we're taking on for the first time. It's both partly due to state legislation, but also due to City Council's goals and our strategic plan as well. It's our guide to look at how we provide affordable, reliable electricity that also meets policy objectives kind of in the 20-year timeline. It's designed to kind of look 5 years, 20 years, 30 years out. So we're kind of looking in that sweet spot of kind of the next 5 to 20 years, give or take. It's a long-term planning roadmap. It identifies solutions to meet electricity needs while managing risks related to costs, reliability, as well as evolving state, federal, and local policy requirements. This is also part, and this is something I want to hit on, this is part of a broader electric infrastructure and utility study that we're doing. That'll also include a wholesale analysis of our infrastructure, how old it is, what needs to be replaced, and putting together a plan to make sure that we keep that up to date, how much it costs to provide the services we do, and then ultimately how we design our rates and how we set our rates for payments. So I want to talk a little bit about this concept of energy versus capacity. You're going to hear me talk about this a lot, and it's kind of the fundamental of what we're looking at when we talk about the situation we're facing. So energy costs are what you pay for the actual electricity used. Think of it as a consumption, how much energy you consume. Capacity is what you're paying to ensure that when you turn your light switch on, your light switch turns on. It's essentially saying at the peak electric demand, which we have, how much needs to be produced for us to have stable, reliable electricity. And in short, Batavia's primary issue identified within the IRP is that we have a mismatch between how much capacity we have currently purchased and how much capacity we use on our peak days. Now, what does that mean? So, a couple of things. One, Batavia's usage of electricity, so that annual consumption, has roughly stayed flat. We're not using more electricity now than we were several years ago. Currently, our energy supply from our NIMPA contract, which is our Prairie State contract, provides more electricity than we need. Again, that's the consumption side of it. However, when we use our electricity and when we need it, don't always align. Or I should say, when we procure it and when we need it, don't always align. Now, what does that mean? Our peak load is somewhere in the 80 megawatt range. We purchased 55 megawatts from the NIMPA contract or Prairie State. That leaves about 20 to 30 megawatts, give or take, that is an exposure on the market, the energy market. And with that, we're forecasting those capacity prices, which is where that 20 to 30 something megawatts is, those prices that we pay for that are going to substantially rise between the 2020s, 2030s, and into the 2040s as supply and demand get more crunched and there's fewer resources available, which pushes up the cost of electricity. So that's the fundamental problem that the IRP seeks to address, is we have 55 megawatts from our Prairie State contract. During the summer when it's hot and when we're all running our electricity and our air conditioners, we're somewhere in the 80 range. That gap is an unhedged market exposure, meaning that if those prices, as we forecast, rising 3 to 5 times between now and the 2030 and into the 2030s and 2040s, that gap is where there's an unhedged exposure, which means higher costs and other things to Batavia ratepayers. That's what the IRP seeks to address. So now I'm going to get a little bit into the load forecast, how we came to that conclusion, then we'll jump into the other parts of it. So it uses 3 scenarios to model potential loads, and it takes into a couple of things. Native load, that's basically how much are we using generally, things fluctuate kind of gradually here and there. That's what native load means. EV adoption rates, electric vehicles use electricity, changes what we have to plan for. Rooftop solar, if you're producing electricity, we don't need to buy as much, so we need to take that into consideration. Natural gas prices. In Northern Illinois and throughout the area we are in, natural gas and electricity prices are tied very closely to one another. So when gas prices go up, electricity prices go up. When gas prices go down, electricity prices tend to go down. The implied marginal heat rate is a measure of how efficient the entire generating fleet as a whole. So when you account for all the nuclear plants, the coal plants, the gas plants, when you account for renewables like solar and wind, how efficient is it at turning whatever raw resource it has into electricity? Then ComEd capacity prices. We are in the ComEd region, and when we buy capacity, it is through the ComEd area, not ComEd directly, but the area as a whole. We pay a locational price for that. And then how do we expect technology costs to change? Do we expect solar panels to become cheaper? Do we expect wind to become cheaper? Do we expect tariffs to rise the price of natural gas and other things? So those are all what get baked into trying to design a load forecast. So there's 3 scenarios that we forecast: high, reference, and low. And I'll kind of walk you through what goes into each. So the reference scenario is kind of base level assumptions of what we have. And where do we get that data? Comes from places like the Energy Information Administration, which publishes tons and tons of data about grids across the country, about local programs, et cetera, to try to give an idea of what we can expect now and into the future. ComEd has to make filings with PJM, who's the regional grid operator, and that tends to be what the entire 4 million customer ComEd region is forecasting. That's what our neighbors in West Chicago, our neighbors in Elburn, kind of right around us, that's what they're in a ComEd region. So it's a good proxy for our own planning as well. Now, what are the different scenarios? Reference, base. We're assuming that the data they provide is the data we assume. So if we assume gas price in 2045 is going to be this, we use that. Then we get into the high forecast, which is high energy prices. And that means that there's less solar generation because there is a bigger crunch, and that if there was more solar generation, there would be not this high forecast. There's more energy use. It means a tighter supply and demand, pushing energy prices higher. So it gets down to kind of the supply and demand concept. Low, we got more solar, less load, there's more abundant supply, and prices are kept lower, relatively speaking. We're still forecasting price increases long term, but they're not as fast in the low scenario. And then within each of these options, it goes through what are each of the subcases and different parts that build into each of those, and that's explained further within the IRP as a whole. So generally speaking, between both the low, medium, and high forecast, we're expecting our 2045 peak load to be somewhere between 80 and 100 megawatts. Our current peak load is at 85.5 megawatts. And then I just want to point out the data center load that we're expecting is not purchased through the city of Batavia. So we don't go out and procure their load like we do for other customers. They're buying directly off the grid and paying a fee as a result of that. So we do not need to procure their load for them. Now we'll talk a little bit about pricing, how we expect market prices to go over the next several years and some of the why. So like I said, to serve as basically we buy power and then sell it to you all as residents, businesses, and the community at large. Right now, we're buying 55 megawatts 24/7, 365 via the NIMPA contract, the Northern Illinois Municipal Power Agency. Also, it's Prairie State is where we get 55 megawatts of generating output 24/7, 365. So with that, when we are at our 85.5 megawatts, 55 of that is accounted for via the Prairie State Energy Campus. But that still leaves that gap, which is what we're talking about. Furthermore, when the generating when Prairie State has to ramp down output to meet CEJA legislation, which requires, I think, a 50% emissions reduction, that will further cause us to have to identify additional capacity resources. And that's another thing that this forecasts as well. Ultimately, when we rely on the market purchases, there's a level of risk to ratepayers. That's kind of the whole idea behind where we're at. And we've experienced this. Our capacity costs went from somewhere in the range of, I want to say 25 per, what's the unit?
Megawatt day.
Per megawatt day to over $320 per megawatt day in 1 year. So our cost of capacity that we pay as the city of Batavia, a few years ago, we were in the $25 megawatt day range. How much you pay per megawatt of capacity in a day? It's now over $300. So that's a real price increase that we've partially not had to raise rates because of the Prairie State contract, which provides capacity hedge at 55 megawatts. So that's some of the reasons behind that and some of the capacity price increases that have really come on high over the last couple of years. So a couple of kind of market price assumptions. IRP expects increasing global demand for liquefied natural gas to drive up natural gas prices. Like I said, natural gas prices are tied to electricity prices. Natural gas prices go up, we expect electricity prices to go up. Similarly, as a result, we expect capacity prices to increase into the 2030s as there's an increasing crunch for demand, which will mean there's more need to put generation on the grid. When supply is tight and demand grows, what does that do to the price? It increases it. Like I said, the projected increase in capacity prices by 2045 is roughly 3 to 5 times higher than where we're at right now. So, like I said, this is the energy price, that per kilowatt hour that you would pay or per megawatt hour that you would pay. You can see we're expecting in the 2030s to 2040s this big increase in the price of electricity. Now with capacity, which is the right one, we also expect that to keep going up until basically there's enough generation for the demand that we're expecting. And right now we're in a very high demand electric market with very low supply coming online. What does that do? That rises prices. So as a result, our cost we have on the open market, which is typically on our summer days where we're all running our air conditioners, that between 20 and 50 megawatts is an unhedged exposure. That's a potential cost increase that Batavia ratepayers could have. And that furthermore increases with the reduction of generating output at Prairie State in the 2030s due to CEJA. Supply side options. So this gets at how do we solve that gap? We have between 25 and 50 megawatts that we're having to purchase on the open market on most summer days. How do we solve that? So we considered a couple of options. One, status quo. When you start with a policy analysis, you always look at what happens if we do nothing. So that's not up here, but that's an option. We looked at a battery. We looked at wind, solar. What about a solar and a battery? And then we also looked at a natural gas reciprocating engine, which you should think of as basically an internal combustion engine, but running on natural gas instead of gasoline. Now, with that, for a 2030 resource deployment, the only resource that Brattle, who's our consultant, forecasts to pay for itself, essentially, in the reference scenario with the 2030 deployment is a natural gas reciprocating engine. However, in the high market price scenario, where costs are higher, most of the portfolios perform better. And then in the low market price scenario, you can see different things as well in terms of how different portfolios perform. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in detail in a minute. So when we talked about all these options, a battery, wind, solar and battery, and then a natural gas reciprocating engine, between 2026 and 2045, which is the period of this study, we would expect cumulatively a natural gas reciprocating engine could save between anywhere from $4 to $15 million. At the same time, with optimal online dates, the options of battery, solar, wind, etc., could cost up to $400,000. Again, this is cumulatively, or save up to $8.4 million between 2026 and 2045 with optimal online dates. For all of these resources, battery, solar, wind, etc., the optimal online dates for those are not until the early 2040s, so they do not recommend doing anything in the immediate term, but it's something to keep an eye on long term for that. Next, we get into demand side options. Again, you've got your supply and demand. You can either use or get more electricity or use less. They have the same impact, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a second. So demand side resources can reduce how much electricity and capacity we need to buy. Because of when we use electricity, most of our highest peak hours are on hot summer days in the middle of summer. That's not surprising. We're all running our air conditioners. That's what causes our electricity use to rise the most. We looked at a number of different modeling or programs that we could run, and we'll talk a little bit more about which ones have the most promise here, but basically there are ways to reduce the amount of electricity we're using. There's HVAC control, where you let the utility literally turn up or down your HVAC to reduce load or increase load. Grid interactive water heating, similar with your water heater. You basically go when most useful to the grid. EV time of use, EV managed charging, and then EV vehicle to grid. We have large customer demand response, where a company might say, I'm going to move a shift to a different time of day to use electricity at different times of day. And then we also looked at behind the meter battery storage, time varying rates, and behavioral demand response type programs. Now, ultimately, there's a couple of them that prove that they would likely most work in the city of Batavia, based on our surveys, as well as based on our customer profiles that we have. Those are time of use pricing, which is where overnight your rates might be lower than they are during the day or at peak times to try to incentivize you to change your habits of when you use electricity. We get into EV time of use rates, which is where if you have an EV and you're charging, you'll get better rates at certain times a day because it's beneficial to not have to procure capacity for you to charge your EV at 4 in the afternoon. Excuse me. We also look at smart thermostat programs, which also goes to, again, that reduction in load. On a hot summer day, you may turn up your air conditioning from 72 to 75 across the entire grid. That can have a pretty big impact, about 5 megawatts if every resident did that. So again, it comes down to kind of how do you balance both the supply side resources and the demand side resources. And then we model kind of what the expected benefit per participant per year is. So that's actually what you would be expected to save with those types of programs. So that is kind of the high level overview of the integrated resource plan. I'm obviously going to take questions in a second, but kind of next steps is this is our preliminary plan. We're going to take comments on this through the end of 2025. Our public comment period closes on the 31st. I'll tell you more about how you can share those comments on the website and then to me directly. We will take in all the questions you provide or have for us, and we'll work with our consultant Brattle to put together answers by at latest by the end of March. What we'll also be doing is issuing an RFI, request for information, on those supply side resources to get actual pricing and understand what is feasible, what is not, especially in our area. And then in the spring or summer, we'll be releasing the final IRP, which will go through a similar process of this, where we'll put it out there, send out a notice, hold a public hearing, answer questions, and then go through this all again. And now I'm happy to take any questions. Laura's got a microphone and she can come around to kind of hand that off to folks, but this is a very complicated document. This is a complicated process. I've tried to explain it in about 20, 25 minutes. I want you all to know I'm making myself available. If you want to chat more or go more in detail, find me after this and we'll take as much time as I need to walk you through any of this. So I'll open it up to questions.
So I understand you guys are in the process of renewing or refurbishing a wastewater treatment plant. Is that correct?
Yes.
In the process of doing that, have you guys evaluated the prospect of an anaerobic digester or something along those lines?
I don't know. I'll have to get it.
It was already part of our process. Go ahead.
I will have to look into that. I thought we were talking about electric tonight, so I'm a little unprepared.
Yes. I think we already have an anaerobic digester because I remember in the first phase of the wastewater treatment plant upgrades, we were really excited about that because that meant that we didn't have to use any outside energy to heat that. Okay. And that because the process itself creates its own heat. Right. Yes.
Have you guys considered the potential of incorporating one that is made for potentially food waste and other waste materials from the community that could be a separate digester?
That was not contemplated during this phase of the IRP.
No, but I believe that the county is working on a facility to collect food scraps from our area because that's one of the things that has held us back from being able to have a food scrap program. We would love to have one, but it's hard to find plants that are open throughout the entire year, and there aren't any that are located closely. But I think that is something that the county is working on as an initiative.
Laura, I would also like to add, I am not aware of a lot of that happening in Illinois, but there's more of that type of development with waste and stuff being converted to energy with dairy farms and stuff like that in Wisconsin and even compost. But it's not something that's local within the suburbs.
How about the utilization of geothermal?
So geothermal was looked at as part of this. The main reason is that in our area in Illinois, we do not have many geothermal resources. When we talk about geothermal in the context of power supply, we're talking about like somewhere like in Iceland or somewhere like that, where they take the heat underground, boil water, and then turn it into that. So we did consider geothermal energy sources. It's just that it's not a great candidate for our region, especially in northern Illinois where there's not a lot of geothermal resources available.
If there were more anaerobic, because I know they are putting them up more and more. So there was a big one in the city. Actually, maybe I introduced somebody next to me because she did work on a project, a large digester that powers around a third of Portland, Oregon. Yeah.
Hi, Tracy Hill. Nice to meet you. When I was looking at your options and you've done your due diligence, you did go through and even the 4-hour battery, and I commend you on that. I kind of looked into your wastewater treatment facility, and there are some biosolid collection, but I would love to have the opportunity to proffer some additional options. Even externally, I think we can do a little better by your wastewater treatment plant. And when you couple that collection of biogas, then all of a sudden you're able to add other technologies where you would actually be producing your own electricity and kind of getting away from that coal fired plant way before that deadline of the, what was it, 38, I think, when phase 1 is going to be retired. So if you don't mind, I would love to give you my information and we can have a chat.
Absolutely. We can go back to our consultant and ask them a little bit more about biomass and biofuel type resources as well. We can have that conversation.
One more question. If there were opportunities for local farms or communities to produce their own power, providing a surplus, would the city be open to creating contracts with community members if they were to, and then also secondarily, as far as a permitting process within the community, would you guys, I guess, fast track groups that are seeking to contribute and produce, favorable terms with the city if they were to put something on their property?
We have not had those discussions, but that's certainly a conversation we can have as part of this IRP process, should biofuel or biomass look to be a realistic option for sure.
Awesome.
Other questions? Going up here.
Coming up.
Thanks. You mentioned the 4-hour battery option.
Yes.
Is that because peak power lasts for about 4 hours during the hot days?
Right now in PJM, which is our grid we're in, basically it goes all the way out to New York, all the way out west to Iowa. There is limited applicability at the moment for 4-hour plus batteries in the PJM grid. Brattle does recommend that we keep an eye on it and look to see if that could be a situation. But right now, 4-hour batteries, this tends to be what PJM wants and lets you put on the grid to be used like that. But yes, it goes back to when the peak loads hit, typically from 3 p.m. to like 7 p.m. roughly. That's about your 4-hour battery. So we would be discharging that as opposed to buying it off the grid at that time.
And then you mentioned something about something retires in 2036? 2038.
Yeah.
So that's a nuke somewhere?
So the city of Batavia owns, via the Northern Illinois NIMPA, 55 megawatts of the Prairie State Energy Campus. It's a coal power plant down in Southern Illinois. This Climate and Equitable Jobs Act requires emissions reductions of 50% by 2030.
2035.
Yes.
Or it has to shut down half of its generation
Yes.
in order to achieve that.
So as a result, at this point, we expect, and that things obviously could change between now and then, we expect that essentially half the plant will either stop operating or that the amount of energy produced is halved. You have the amount of emissions, you reduce the energy output in half, you theoretically reduce the emissions in half. Now, as a result, that leaves 20-something megawatts that we had through Prairie State that we no longer have available. And NIMPA would be making market purchases most likely to replenish that power. So now the market exposure goes from, we had 55 megawatts and now we're buying a portion. Now that goes to, we only have 27 or something megawatts, and that grows further. So that's the situation in the 2030s with the expected reduction of Prairie State. No problem.
Other questions?
I actually should have asked this question a few weeks ago when we talked, but you said the capacity rate has gone from 25 to over 300.
Correct.
I think for the people in the room, it'd be a good idea to know what our NIMBA rate is for comparison. because that is just that excess once you're over the 55. So I'll let you respond.
Yeah, so
Steve?
I'll chime in for a second, but then I'll let Steve go. Part of that is NIMPA is a generator. So NIMPA also, via owning Prairie State, earns revenues in the capacity market. So NIMPA is both selling power, but at those times where we're not using our full capacity or our full allotment of 55 megawatts, NIMPA is selling that on the grid. At this point, most of the time, that is being sold at a profitable rate. But I'll let Steve kind of chime in more about how that, if he has anything to chime in.
You did a pretty good job, but Alderman White, to your point, since Batavia is an owner of this plant, we're not buying power at retail. So when you read in the news a lot of my rates going up due to this capacity price, the cost of having that power plant available during the peak period, we're not exposed to that because we are owners of the plant. And so the cost of operating the plant is relatively stable. There certainly are capital improvement programs, normal wear and tear of things that go on at the plant, but largely the cost to operate the plant is maintained year to year. So in 2026, the cost of energy and capacity from Prairie State actually went down because of these realized revenues from the increased capacity from prices that were cleared in the auction. And so the auction for 2020, the auction prices go from June to May of the calendar year. So starting last June, that's when we were hit with the $326 a megawatt day. But Prairie State was also generating at that same amount. And so we were able to realize an increased revenue, because if you want to think of power as a commodity, your product is suddenly worth more. And since we own the plant, or a portion of the plant, I should say, we were able to realize the reduction in the cost to the members. So what we were paying about 59 cents a kilowatt hour, that's what the Prairie State cost to generate was last year. It's going to be 54 cents in 2026. So that actually, we're realizing some savings there. I don't know if that fully answered your question or if I went on a tangent here, but both. Anything else I could clarify? Okay.
Other questions in the room? I know we do have we'll do you in the back. We do have a few online, so we'll get to those as well.
Thank you. Thank you. One thing I was surprised to see was the stagnant load growth assumptions. And I've been here, I got my first EV in 2018, and I really appreciated the rebate that was offered through Batavia for getting a charger installed at my house. And back then I was turning heads going through downtown because I was one of the only Model 3s in town. Now they're everywhere. And I guess my battery's 75 kilowatt hour and they're much bigger now. So it's just surprising to me to see a stagnant load growth assumption between EVs and then also like the neighborhoods being built like over by Dairy Queen and other places, that it seems like a stretch for that to be flat, in my opinion.
So that no load growth goes back to at least 2018. So since 2018, even as we've added neighborhoods, as we've electrified and had people have added EVs, we have not seen that load growth. And that comes from a couple of different ways. One, energy efficiency. The amount of people still moving to LED lights, moving to LED electric equipment, even the TV you might have purchased, it's going to be significantly more efficient than even a TV you bought 10, 15 years ago. So that's part of the reason why we're not expecting significant load growth. And that's the thing you tend to see across the region is, aside from data centers, there's not a lot of load growth happening because of the efficiency gains. Even as we add in these neighborhoods and as we add in these people, we're still not seeing appreciable load growth because it's offset a lot of times by efficiency. And Steve, I don't know how much a neighborhood generates in terms of electricity, but it's not a ton in the grand scheme of things generally, right? Correct.
Yeah. And again, I know it seems silly to talk about LED lights in this day and age, but they 80% of the residential load 15 years ago was lighting. And now that's almost nothing. And so your air conditioners and refrigerators and things like that are really what is that's what's using in neighborhoods these days. So
The other thing is we were surprised to see the low number of chargers being installed in comparison to the number of EVs that are registered and here in Batavia, which means a significant amount of people are not charging at home, which is surprising.
Other questions from the room? All right. Yes. And then we'll hop online.
So my question is, do the solutions that Brattle proposed eliminate our exposure to the market? And could you explain that, please?
Absolutely. None of these proposals are designed to fully eliminate the Batavia exposure to the market. It's designed to reduce the exposure. Like I said, our exposure is somewhere between 20 and 40 something megawatts, give or take, depending on when. There is a reasonable amount of exposure to be hedged, essentially how much exposure we have. The proposal looks at 10 megawatt increments of electricity. That would cut it by a good amount, by about a quarter of the exposure. One of the things we'll have in the final IRP is consideration of how different levels of hedging affect the economics of it. So how much a 10 megawatt versus a 15 megawatt versus a 20 megawatt hedge looks at the economics of the gap that we have. So it's not designed to fully close it, but it goes at, there's a level of market exposure that is viewed as reasonable. And so right now, our exposure is significantly reduced because of our NIMPA contract, which provides 55 megawatts of 24/7 capacity. Now, when you add in 10 of that, we're still selling back sometimes, but it's designed to kind of close that gap that we have.
But not eliminate.
It would not eliminate, and it's not designed to eliminate it, no.
And do any of the proposals do a better job closing that?
That's where the natural gas reciprocating engine is viewed to be best at closing that gap.
But at only a 1% difference. So it's a pretty heavy lift for a 1.1%.
Any other questions in the room before I hop online? All right. So forgive me while I read this. Can we break out residential versus industrial supply and demand forecasts? That is certainly something we can look at doing. What is the plan for who would build, own, and maintain and operate a natural gas reciprocating engine? That's a good question. There's a couple ways we could do this, and this is something that Brattle talks about within the IRP, is contracting versus owning. The main reason that the general preference would be towards ownership is because you're able to retain those capacity credits. In any sort of contracting arrangement, we would just need to make sure that those capacity credits are passed on. That's certainly something that can be done. It's just not necessarily as common as when you're in an ownership level situation. In terms of like location, where, et cetera, that would be something that we would look at as part of this RFI process, specifically like what are the O&M costs, what are these ongoing costs, et cetera, how do different locations potentially change those sorts of things. So that's something that you can expect to see further and more fleshed out in terms of the final IRP.
Can I ask real quick, do you have an estimated cost of the recent?
Yes.
The question was, do we have an estimated cost of a recent recip?
I believe that was in there, and I think what the amount was somewhere in the 20 million range. Again, that's a guess based, or that's an estimate based on recently built recips based on the Energy Information Administration. That's why we'll be going out for an RFI to understand actual costs.
And that's a 10 megawatt facility?
It would be a 10 megawatt facility, correct. Since Prairie State needs to shut down 45% by 2038, about 10 years from now, why doesn't the IRP address options for replacement energy? For example, modifying the power purchase agreement so Batavia can purchase its own replacement energy. That is a question that I think we need to talk more about, and we'll get you an answer. Sorry, go ahead, Laura.
So one of the things that I would say is this IRP is making recommendations or identifying recommendations to implement within the next 5 years, while identifying those things which should be addressed in future IRPs. We presume that our cadence will be about every 5 years. So in 2030, as we approach that closure more closely, we expect to address that more fully in our next IRP.
Next question is, are we also forecasting solar excess from residential and commercial that could be used stored access during peak surge or peak use? In the IRP, they do talk about when solar is used and whether that might be available. That's also brought into the forecast of when we have our peak load. Oftentimes the peak load coincides with the peak solar production. And so a lot of times you're using that directly at the same time, but that's something we can flesh out a little more and explain further. You mentioned several times that in summer we can go up to 80 megawatts from the 50. What is the demand relating to the 50 megawatts figure in fall, winter, and spring? Do we derive any benefits for using less than 50 megawatts? I'll let Steve answer the load question, but at this point where we're at right now with market prices, any energy or capacity that is not used is sold to the grid, and I believe it's sold at a profit. But Steve can chime in about kind of how the load changes throughout the year.
Yeah, load-wise, if it's not a hot summer day, we're typically in the mid 70 megawatt range, in the spring, summer, or I should say summer months, spring and fall, and most of winter, we're in the 55 to low 60 megawatts during the business week. On weekends, we're down in the 30 to 40 megawatt range. And then if it's super cold in a polar vortex or something like that, we've seen as high as 68 megawatts.
We'll provide you the sources. There's a document that'll be going up soon with that as well. At this point, we're going to turn it over to public comment. So what I'll do is I'll read off a name. I believe we have one person online who we'll get to. But feel free to come make a comment. Use the microphone here so we capture that on BATV. And we'll get started. So first up is Renner Barcella. Yes, please use the mic. I'll come sit over here to make it less awkward. I'll join you, Chris.
Right here.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, my name is Renner Barcella. I'm a Batavia resident, but I've also spent almost a decade of my career working in the climate movement. So I care a lot about climate, and I think ultimately that's why I'm here. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about what part of this process I really want to advocate for. And the thing I actually come back to is really that Batavia is one of the first municipalities to go through this process. And in the future, as we look back and we do this again in 5 years, but also as other municipalities do this, they're going to look to us as a model. And so the part that's really the most important to me is not any particular outcome of what is in the IRP, but that we're building a process and a template for an IRP that allows decision makers to really make decisions like what do we do when Prairie State retires that reflect the values of this community. You often hear integrated resource plans described as a roadmap, but as we've talked about, it's really long sight of how long this thing is looking at. By the time 20 years is up, my elementary school age kids will be Max's age. And so I think of IRPs as really more of a compass than a roadmap of this should be a tool that decision makers like the council can use to make informed decisions for decades to come. And so I think one of the things that I'm really looking to see is for the next draft of the IRP to be presented in a way that makes those choices clear. Obviously, this is very dense stuff. I want decision makers, advocates from the community to be able to look at it and see how, if I want a decision that reflects my values, how in this might I go about getting that done? I've shared with Max the City of Orlando has a municipal IRP. It's not in PJM, but they deal with many of the same problems. And I think they've done a really good job of presenting data in a way where it's not just, here's the problem that we've identified, and here is the solution that we think works best, but they really map it out in a, here are the criteria that we are judging things by, here's how each of these solutions perform in each of those criteria, so you can really see a big picture of what you're giving and taking in the longer term. So in the next round of the IRP, I would love to see something that looks a little bit more like that compass, because we're not a monopoly utility. We are a scrappy representative democracy, and we will be setting ourselves up for success if we can build a tool to really lean into that. Thank you.
Thank you for your feedback, and thank you for your participation all along. Next, we have Ralph Pasquinelli.
Split this around. Hi, my name is Ralph Pasquinelli. I'm a retired electrical engineer from Fermilab for some 38 years, and I've lived in Batavia now for 46 years. So I'm very much concerned with what goes on in my community. No matter what action is taken, the cost for energy is going to increase in the coming decades. No one's going to argue with that comment. But that being said, the key observation 9D in the IRP, choosing a green or no solution would cost Batavian households an additional $3.5 to $4.1 million over 20 years. While the gas-fired plant cost estimate does indicate a 1.1% cost savings over a green or no solution whatsoever. Well, consider the worst case for 10,000 Batavia households, which is the current estimate. The last thing I saw online was 10,300. And the chances of growing that is not much unless we expand our borders out west past Randall Road. So using 10,000 households for an estimation of what's happening is a reasonable thing to do. And so this leads up to only about $410 incremental cost over 20 years. So it's going to cost that this whole process is going to cost $20 a family, a house, every year. That's where that 1.1% becomes really insignificant. Okay, so making a choice of gas over green or nothing based on that is absolutely ridiculous. And so, plus none of this takes into effect the fact that there's a lot of R&D going on in energy capacity, and that is very likely, as most technology advances, that it becomes cheaper as time goes on, which folds even more against gas. So that green should be given a little more consideration, and not so much everything you hear about gas. This problem is not only facing Batavia, but it's nationwide and it's global. What efforts are being conducted on a wider scale to address the future needs for either local communities that are in our same state? We've already heard Elburn, and we know that Rochelle is on this. But I think we need to take a look at this as a problem for everybody, not just Batavia. And so it needs to be looked that way in the IRP. The 10 megawatt peaker plant proposal, it's only a third of projected needs, and we heard that clearly. So it doesn't represent the 20 extra megawatts, which you're going to have to purchase power on the open market, and that's going to be at peak prices. You know, whether you do nothing, whether you take gas or a green, anything else, that's still the situation. So the proposal doesn't address the full problem. Okay, and that's clearly in key observation 7A that's pointed out, and I consider that's pretty insignificant as well. In key observation 2A, does Batavia's contract with NIMPA, which is 55 megawatts, allow selling excess capacity to other communities who are in need when our load requirements are satisfied? It sounds like we kind of do that already. And it basically, you know, what we don't use at the 50 megawatts, you know, is sold off. And if that's true, we typically do not use 50 gigawatt hours a year that could be sold off. And maybe that happens. It does. Okay, so that's a good thing. That's just a comment. Okay, electric vehicle usage. It's predicted that within the next 10 years, there will be 30 to 50% of the vehicles on the road will be electric. Okay, the current number of households, again, is 10,000. So let's just take, for an example, 1/3 of those households will have an EV or two, one or two of those EV cars. And we'll assume also that every car kind of drives 10,000 miles. I don't drive 6 or something, but a lot of people drive a hell of a lot more for whatever reason. I'm picking a number of 10,000 miles. You can finagle the numbers as you wish, okay? An average EV requires 50 to 100 kilowatt hours to charge. We already heard that he's got a 75 kilowatt battery, and so it takes so much, but they vary. It depends on how heavy your car is. You got a little car, a big car. So with that usage, it's only 7.5 to 21, worst case, gigawatt hours annually out of the current 450 gigawatt hours we're using. Electrical vehicles are insignificant in terms of the load. And we've already seen that this explains part, of course, why the load is kind of leveled. LED lights certainly reduce an enormous amount of energy usage, and we're using more in electric vehicles, say, and all that. But even projected in the future, it's going to be a very small percentage of the load. So electric vehicles should not be considered, oh, everyone's going to have a charging station. Capacity is there for that. Now, during summer peak usage time, how many hours per day during the peak are we exceeding that 55 megawatt capacity? Because that's when you really need to charge the battery with the time it's not over the 55 megawatts rather, and you're charging a battery and you use that same information to calculate how large a battery you need, all right, as a green potential solution. Like I said, everything to do with this 1.1% is, if you know anything about statistics, all you got to do is go to the polls, right? When they come out and they poll for a presidential candidate or anything else, that's plus or minus 3%, you know, and they think they're pretty accurate. This is 1.1%. It's trivial. It's not worth worrying about. Now, for the survey, which is mentioned there as well, I'm not sure what level of details were available to the public when the survey was taken, okay? But surveys covering the next 20 years, okay, they're not valid because the percentage of those people who participated in the survey, okay, are not going to be around to take the full benefit of what they voted for. Okay, so yeah, if I ask you, do you want to pay another 5, 10, or whatever dollars or percent on your electric bill, and you asked it to the public right now, the answer is going to be no. And that's what the survey showed. 37% said maybe, and then pretty much everyone else said no. So that survey should not be used in supporting anything to choose a 10 megawatt plan. In conclusion, this proposal does not adequately address the needs for future electrical capacity need for Batavia, okay? And I think any decision to seriously pursue the gas-fired peaker plant should be very much discouraged because I don't think they've done enough homework to know about alternatives, and especially alternatives that only cover 30% of the need.
Thank you. Marianne Fasano.
Okay. Yes, Marianne Fasano. Yes, I live in Batavia. And yes, I'm on the library board. And yes, I'm on the BATV board. And that's enough volunteering. Thank you very much. But I appreciate the opportunity to share my priorities about Batavia's energy future, which are based on my firm conviction that each of us has a small but important role to play in mitigating the dangerous effects of climate change. To that end, I ask that the city's IRP address the following: flexibility, prioritize flexible, scalable investments in clean energy and demand management, address fluctuating gas prices, lessen reliance on dirty power sources, and consider future regulatory constraints. Forward thinking, seek opportunities for 21st century alternative sources of energy, offer sustainable alternatives, not a natural gas plant that only meets a small portion of our energy needs and additionally brings fracked gas to Batavia. Embrace new technology to help achieve the best outcome for all of us, our needs and our energy usage. Address the closure, partial and full, of Prairie State, the place we love to hate. Affordability, offer workable solutions such as time of day pricing, smart thermostats, EV managed charging incentives, and other smart strategies to balance rates with consumption and demand. Reconsider the net metering policy with attractive options that encourage citizens to adopt green energy alternatives such as solar. Full disclosure, I am the owner of a new solar system, which sadly, right now, is not producing anything because it's covered in snow. And no, I'm not going up there to clean it. Engagement. Present a revised IRP overview, executive summary in clear language, avoiding jargon. Include solid information such as the survey data from June 2025, which indicates that residents are willing to pay modest increases for more renewable energy. Revise the IRP to reflect that the majority of residents are frustrated with the decision to purchase electricity from Prairie State, and we should not make that mistake again. Thank you.
Thank you. Maggie Carter.
Hello. My name is Maggie Carter, as you've just said. Honestly, I share a lot of the same opinions as Marianne, so a lot of my bullet points are very similar to hers. And you said it excellently, Marianne. Thank you. I want to thank you, though, for working with residents to kind of like come together on this process and gather input from us. And thank you for kind of summarizing the IRP in a much more manageable form through your 15 to 20-minute presentation rather than 108 pages. However, I do feel like the natural gas plant that we're considering and kind of is the main focus of the IRP seems like more of the same. I know a lot of the residents feel that like we're really locked in with the Prairie State contract. The Prairie State contract, like I know that we've in the past tried to see if there's anything we can do about it, but we're stuck. And I think that creating another while it may kind of hedge our risks against the open market, I feel like building another power plant is just going to kind of leave us in the same position. We're going to be stuck with it. It's not modular. It can't respond to Batavia's demands, whether they increase or decrease. And again, it does not address climate change either, which is proven. And we all know we're going there. So it seems like we should be kind of, again, pointing ourselves toward a direction to kind of like mitigate those. Also, again, we've kind of heard it only addresses like 10 kilowatt hours, whereas something else that might be more modular and sustainable, like solar, is just the one that comes to my brain most readily. You can always add more solar panels. It's modular. It can kind of work with what you're working with on a demand perspective. The gas plant also would not provide Batavians with any kind of energy mix. I know that ComEd customers, a lot of their energy is from natural gas as well as coal. However, they have a percentage that comes from wind and a percentage that comes from solar and a percentage that is more sustainable. And right now, Batavians are getting none of that, which doesn't sit well with me. The other thing that I feel like the IRP doesn't really touch on is that Illinois is a state that does legislate emissions, like we've seen with CEJA. And that kind of opens us up to legislative risks as well as maybe financial risks, or whenever we decide we don't need this natural plant or this recip plant. So I could see in the future, a lot of Illinois legislation is kind of coming towards like those plants that have larger emissions. Right now, I know that smaller plants aren't necessarily subject to the same standards as them, but I feel like that opens us up to a legislative risk as well. And then again, we're finding ourselves in the same position that we were in, or that we are in currently with Prairie State. And again, this does not really put us on a good trajectory for when the Prairie State plant closes or has to reduce its output. And that's like a very big known that is going to impact a lot of our energy supply, which I feel like just kind of lends itself more towards we need to be looking at solutions that are more modular than just one natural gas plant. Also, I feel like a 1.1% difference in cost is not enough to justify this particular impact on the climate that we would knowingly be getting ourselves into in 2025. It seems a little ridiculous to me to be contributing to climate change in this way when we know what's happening and we know the impacts. Anyway, thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. Kelly Burke. Then did anyone else who wants to speak for the IRP who didn't sign up want to speak? Okay, then after you, we'll go online.
All right, so, oh, I'm loud. Hi, everyone, I'm Kelly Burke. Do I need to provide my address? I'm sorry.
You're good.
Okay. So ultimately, sort of threefold. One, I sort of mentioned earlier, I would love to put in a recommendation to speed up permitting procedures through the county for groups that are trying to implement clean energy infrastructure on their farms, if that is a possibility. If they're able to produce above a certain amount of power, to be able to negotiate with either the city or the county to provide that power at a pre-negotiated rate and maybe be able to participate in contract negotiations. And then ultimately talking about support for different bills. The Illinois Environmental Council proposed a bill that really focused on behind the meter power and really decentralized grid systems, which I think you guys are sort of ahead of the game, being the fact that you're opting in to, you have your own power here. So I just wanted to shed light on the potential of supporting that initiative and seeing what the community could possibly do to showcase that support. Maybe work with groups to write letters of support or contribute in some manner, one way or the other. And those are really the key points I wanted to bring up. Ultimately, one more thing is if groups are producing power both locally within the area as well as within the other municipalities that are in the network here, so let's say Rochelle, for instance, if there were to be some sort of a large power plant, maybe talking a little bit more about how that would impact the local power here and how maybe we could support the other cities within the network to maybe offload or lower the power consumption by producing more power, since this is kind of a little bit more community-based and that's a little bit more rural. How could we leverage that? Yeah, those are sort of my key points. So thank you.
Yep. All right, I think the only person on here would be Susan. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Max?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. Yes, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight while I'm not in Batavia proper. My overall concern with the draft IRP is that it does not reflect the values and priorities of Batavia. And I'll illustrate this with two examples. First, just 3 months ago in September, Batavia City Council adopted an energy policy that set out Batavia's priorities for energy resource planning: resiliency, sustainability, affordability, and adaptability. 3 of these 4 priorities are missing from Brattle's statement of purpose in the first key observation of the draft IRP. And both the purpose and the content of the IRP need to be revised to conform to the priorities set out in Batavia's energy policy. Second, a natural gas reciprocating engine is being recommended for its capacity credits, which are expected to help Batavia when it buys extra electricity on the market during peak usage periods. However, the benefits of these capacity credits are far outweighed by 4 disadvantages. 1, the cost of owning another fossil fuel asset entrenches Batavia in another old and outdated business model for the next 30 years. Second, the demand for natural gas generators by private industries and the new tariffs make the cost of a gas engine uneconomical for a public utility like Batavia's. Third, the overall capacity credit advantage of a gas engine represents only a 1% savings over other options like battery storage. This is an economically insignificant, meaningless benefit. And finally, a 10 megawatt, 10 watts of electricity produced by a gas engine represents only 20 to 30% of the power Batavia buys on the market. The city will still have exposure to market volatility for 70 to 80% of the electricity it needs during peak usage periods. In light of that, all of that, the IRP needs to be revised to offer a menu of realistic alternatives to the gas engine. This menu needs to include electrification to use the power we already buy from Prairie State, investments in renewable energy sources and battery storage, and programs that reduce electricity use during peak periods. These are proven ways to make Batavia's energy future more resilient, adaptable, and sustainable while maintaining affordability. So again, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to make this statement tonight via Zoom.
Okay. All right, that concludes this evening's public hearing. Thank you all for, like I said, thank you all for taking the time to come participate. The fact that we are a municipal electric utility where, you know, your board of directors is elected, that you're able to come and participate and share your input, I think is something rather special. You know, you don't get to do this with a ComEd or an Ameren or someone else. So thank you for your participation. You should expect, you know, if you have questions or anything, please send them my way. My email is up here and I can show you on the website how to get to them. We'll be taking public comment through the end of December. If you have any questions or comments, please send it our way. And then we'll, per the pending legislation, we'll have 90 days to respond to all those comments. So you can expect that we'll have responses posted and shared sometime before early or the spring of next year. Thank you again. We're now going to hop into our committee of the whole meeting, which is about 10 minutes behind, which better than I thought we would be. So thank you all. Have a good evening, drive safe, and you're more than welcome to stay for our committee of the whole meeting as well. Take care, everyone. Thank you.